Welcome everyone to the July 2024 CLF Boston/Northeast Reuse Group meeting. Thank you for coming. I know it's July and everyone loves going on vacation, but we appreciate your attendance. So just going over a quick agenda today. We do not have any major speakers, but wanted to definitely go over some recaps of events that have happened recently, along with some industry movement that we've been seeing, and then towards the end, open it up to any Q&A and open discussion. I will say, especially for the first two recaps, if you were there for the Northeast Embodied Carbon Summit or the Reuse Workshop, please speak up and let me know as I kind of go through what you thought of it and any takeaways you had. I'd love to make this as collaborative as possible. So to recap, the Northeast Embodied Carbon Summit happened about 4 weeks ago, and I'd like to think it was fairly successful. At about 350 attendees, the first day had 3 panel discussions, kind of where we are, where we're going, and how do we get there, along with the second day having 6 workshops, including the reuse workshop, which are very well attended. Also, the first night included the Embodied Carbon Reduction Challenge hosted by BE Plus and their winners. The Jones Library was one of the major winners. Once you all get this slide deck, this is an active link to look to see the other winners. But something I really liked about the Jones Library is it did include adaptive reuse. About a third of the building was adaptively reused, along with the new parts that selected low embodied carbon materials. So just a good showcase of the lowest carbon building oftentimes is the one that already exists. To get into the kind of meat and potatoes of it, so last month we did not host a reuse subcommittee meeting. It's because we had the reuse workshop. To anyone here that did attend, we want to say thank you. I think it was really great. About 53 people all in all attended, and really when we were going through, wanted to bring up the topics of really making sure we're connecting roles in the AEC industry and beyond to reuse and circularity. It was great to meet the regional stakeholders, all the micro presentations that we presented. Obviously, I see Randy here and Freya. It was great to not only showcase what is currently going on, but have you all speak to what you need from others, especially as we try to grow and really promote the circular economy. It was great to speak and ask to envision a circular economy in everyone's roles, really looking to kind of contribute to the progress that's already been made and really jumpstart even more progress and collaborating across industries. A question that Laurel and I had for everyone who had attended is, why not you, and really why not now? And just to get into a little bit of recap, so I think in speaking to the attendees who were there and then everything kind of coming afterwards, it was great to see a bit more of an awareness of the regional resources. I know that Boston Building Resources had spoken, and then about a week later had said that I believe they got a visit from Payette and Shaman, which was great to kind of take those first steps of, hey, we heard about you, we want to use you more as a resource. So that was great. I heard some talk about kind of through the Mass DEP, recognizing the need for policy development and asking more questions about what I can do either in my role or with my company to support that policy development, whether it's deconstruction ordinances, demo delays, items like that. We asked everyone to kind of commit to first steps. One of our final slides was, hey, before you leave, think about it. And then after you leave, we want to ask you a commitment. What can you do to start taking these first steps? Whether it's kind of connecting, like I said, with regional resources, if you're a designer on your project, what do kind of simple items that you can take? And then really hoping to unlock some of those better practices. I know in the Q&A session, there were several comments that were brought up was, not only did I not know this existed, but I now can do X. I now can look to design for disassembly. I now can connect with the reuse vendor for these items or make the case of adaptive reuse when looking at historic preservation. And then really what I thought was most important was really just understanding what other stakeholders need. Oftentimes, and we've discussed this before, not only in these subcommittee meetings, but more generally, the industry feels very siloed. And while one group might make a good amount of progress, if that's not being shared with another group, and if you're not understanding what that next step in the supply chain and the next step in the kind of value chain of circularity is, then it's really hard to connect the dots and create something of substance. So, like I said, 53 people showed up. It was great. Here's a photo, as you can see, of some of the attendees, some of which are on the call now. And I will say, I'll back up for a moment. If anyone was there and wants to kind of speak, if you pulled out anything, if you had kind of any realizations or what you thought of it, please.
Yeah, no, I thought it was great, Mike. You know, like you said, 50-something people, and it's getting everybody in the same room is important. You know, you get a lot of dialogue going on, and you learn more and more. I thought it was a great turnout, and I left with stuff.
Great. Anyone else?
I'm sorry I missed it, Michael, but
Get out.
I think I was in the session on policy at that time, but
Sure. Another good session.
yeah.
I thought it was great to really build these discussions and think more broadly with a really wide array of different stakeholders, because I think a lot of the time it does end up being like just a group of architects talking about it and bringing the manufacturers into the conversation and the contractors into the conversation, and it all needs to work together. And so that was really, I think, productive.
Sure.
I wasn't able to make it, but I did have a question, being more from the structural engineering side now. Was there any structural elements discussed?
So I don't know if there was any structural elements initially discussed, but I'll get to it a little bit later. It was brought up that several stakeholders, especially in the area, I believe MIT, are starting to really understand that looking at circularity and reuse is something that right now there's a barrier of, hey, if I'm pulling out a bunch of major timber beams, or if I want to reuse structural steel, there are so many kind of engineering barriers to that, especially in the very risk adverse industry we are in. So that was brought up, and while we didn't have any answers here, when I get to the kind of the bigger industry discussion, there was an EPA grant that was recently awarded to 2 different groups looking at that exact question, because I think that's definitely for most structural engineers a bit of a stumbling block of making sure you can kind of guarantee performance, or even something as simple as having like a salvaged EPD for items. So not yet, but maybe soon.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Great. So while we might not have one like this again, it was great to have everyone in person. Like I said, there was a lot of great connections made. We do have a contact list that I imagine I should probably put together. If anyone is curious of who went or made a connection and didn't get a contact, please reach out. I'd love to kind of connect you and kind of keep taking those steps. Something that I attended, and one of the reasons that Laurel is not on the call right now, this past Monday in Seattle, Building Green hosted its 2024 SCL, SDL, SMEPL, that's Sustainable Construction Leaders, Design Leaders, and MEP Leaders. They had a summit to really bring together, and with the main topic looking at process changes in the kind of design flow of a project, to really, how do we unlock not only more sustainable practices, but really kind of start removing those kinks that are often seen as a barrier, with AEC collaboration being a huge part. Being in attendance, this is my bald head right here. It was really great to speak to not only a lot of the designers, but also speaking to a lot of MEP engineers who were there as well. Oftentimes, the designers that can be in the room they have, I imagine, some great discussion within their own realm of experience and talking about that. But when we're bringing in the contractor perspective and the engineer perspective, it's always good to not only bring in our own perspectives to maybe focus something a little different, but also just to, much like the constructability discussion, really add layers where there wasn't any. So in this about 9-hour workshop, a lot of what I found to be discoveries are, I've mentioned them earlier, but there's a lot of siloed efforts, whether they're in their own design firm or their own company saying, hey, we're trying for to go above and beyond and say, what can we expect that is reused? What can we expect that is a healthy material, but not sharing that within the industry and then beyond. And then something that I had brought up is, especially in construction, design support, whether it's from the engineer, whether it's from the architect, is still very much needed. One of the topics that was brought up by a design firm is why aren't there kind of sustainable or circular best practices inherent to the industry? And I will again say that sustainability in, especially construction, fairly new, especially when looking at topics like circularity, and that because it is such a business as usual take, make, waste, trying to be as efficient with the time and the schedule being the biggest drivers, that I still need a design team to put into the specifications of construction waste management. What are these better practices we're looking for, to call them out on the drawings, items we've discussed before in these subcommittee meetings, because it's still very nascent in the industry. And while we can have success stories where we can have these pilots where we take a look and try to determine, can it be cost neutral or at cost parity, that collaboration and that support with the documents is still very much critical to achieving some of these successes. Another item that was brought up is that pre-construction matters. Now, for designers, that could be broken down to a lot of different things. You could look at schematic design, design development, all the way to construction drawings. But when it comes to contractors and then essentially flowing all the way down the line to end use of materials through subs and haulers, that pre-construction really is important to really iron out what are the sustainability goals of the project. Are we looking for healthy materials? Do we need to do a value engineering exercise that isn't just based off the cost or the time? What is the value that the owner has, and when can we bring that in during pre-construction? And then lastly, a really big discovery was that designing for disassembly really matters. That if you're not designing for disassembly or for deconstruction, then right now you're kind of just kicking the can down the road. There's only so much that can be done going into a space that hasn't been essentially planned for this either compartmentalization or kind of pulling things apart, the real screws, not glue situation. And really trying to work with some of these firms that were there to really impress on them that, like I said, if you're not designing for disassembly, then we can only do so much, but you really unlock that potential, which flows down to reuse vendors, which flows down to secondary markets, and then eventually back to the design teams where they can then specify and draw for these reused products. And then this is a lot, but there's just pictures of the posted boards that were done, but there are some things that I wanted to pull out. So if you look on this, some of the key issues that were brought up were that right now in the industry at large, there's a bit of a process problem with typical design bid build. There's not only siloed efforts, but also kind of siloed communication, that sometimes the contractor might not be brought on till after the bid is, or after the drawings have been fully finalized and you can't change much. Also, in all of the roles that were presented there is a bit of an inherent bias. It's going to be completely true that an architect's going to see the project from one point of view, which might not be the same as the owner, which might not be the same as the contractor. And when really looking to do the best we can on these more sustainable, more circular projects, there really needs to be more specificity as well. I mentioned earlier kind of in this slide of design support is very much needed. When getting specific with it, it needs to go above and beyond of just in a construction waste management specification calling for 75%. Right now in the industry, I would say best practice is actually say, hey, we could try for 75%, but really spell out site separation, spell out in the demo phase what needs to be utilize the material take back program and what needs to be pulled up, put it on the drawings as well. Be very specific as we're kind of going into this, because while it's possible, the last thing we want on a project is to say, oh, we know that all these finishes can be pulled up. We know that these furnitures and these freestanding fixtures can be sent for donation. But if it's not specifically called out, suddenly all of the bids in construction are going up and down. If we're going to try to go low bid, maybe someone excluded it. We aren't bound to these kind of processes because we're not being specific enough. And we're not setting KPIs to really understand, are we improving over time? Can we be better at this? So I thought that was great to kind of look at. And then the other thing I wanted to highlight here, this is for construction documents and construction administration, really looking on the design side. And all these little items you see here were times in which the entire group of 20 or so people recognize that there needs to be more collaboration with not only the design team, but also the general contractor and any subs. The idea of what does really IPD look like? There was an exercise where people said, hey, raise your hands if you've been part of an IPD process before. And of the 65-ish attendees, 3 raised their hand. For those of you who don't know, IPD is the integrated project design, integrated project delivery. Thank you.
Yeah.
Integrated product delivery, and going through that, like I said, 3 of 65, and everyone, when going through, recognized that it makes a lot of sense. Maybe not fully binding all parties to the profit reward, but bringing all parties in as early as possible, not only to smooth out items like constructability, but also to develop these plans, to go through the materials themselves. You note here, in the drawings, people, a lot of the designers thought it would be great to slowly move demolition drawings to even just in nomenclature, calling them deconstruction drawings, because of the other contractors who were there. Also denoted that oftentimes if they have a specification that calls for deconstruction, oftentimes it is priced at such a high level because it is a very taboo word right now in the industry, until it really disseminates and is able to kind of become something closer to normal. Continually calling everything demo drawings and then having a one-off project that's called deconstruction has been very, very unhelpful. And then lastly, really working design team and general contractor to collaborate on what are the sustainability goals and are they feasible? Oftentimes there'll be a 30-page spec on sustainable design requirements that has a lot of well-wishing and we want to do this, or maybe there's only 1 or 2 items or 1 or 2 lines that are called out when they should be at other parts in the drawings. So it was very interesting to hear, especially when it comes to something like a pre-demo salvage assessment. We're realizing now that that is a best practice when looking at what can be donated, what can be salvaged, what can be reused. But oftentimes, if it is a single line item or not called out at all, it's much more difficult to actually enact that practice. So that's why it's so important when making the construction documents that those are included in there. Any questions on this before I move on? I know it's a lot and crazy handwriting.
Michael, I was just typing a question in.
Sure.
Remember North Bennett Street School shared that they use the word dismantle instead of deconstruction. Is the
Sure.
connotation different there? If we started using dismantle? What do you think about that?
I wouldn't say so. I think as North Bennett Street School and the Mass DEP deconstruction group the other day said, it's a very similar process, with demolition being kind of exclusively kind of tear down, bring it all down, send it out, with deconstruction being more mindful and explaining that dismantling. So yeah, I think deconstruction might better refer to the entire process, while dismantling might be seen as something like a soft strip or kind of the first few stages of deconstruction before you get to like a full pull everything out, find a better place for everything. But I would say if you want to use dismantling, equally as important, at least right now, in where the industry is in describing that process. And might even be more palatable, especially for a lot of subcontractors who, as I said, are a little skittish sometimes with deconstruction.
What's the note about trigger words?
This is actually no for me. So in a lot of times contractors, and I'd love to hear any designers who work with contractors, if you have sustainable design requirements, if you have a project where an owner is looking for embodied carbon tracking, oftentimes if it's buried in some sort of specification or a single line item, it's difficult sometimes to catch that. Maybe the subs didn't kind of look through it all the way, or it didn't, and then afterwards you're adding.
On TikTok, any song now is no.
Hey Janice, can you mute? Thank you. The trigger words that I have in my role essentially sent to estimators and project teams is if you're going through an RFP, if you're going through a project and you see the terms deconstruction, embodied carbon, really what we're seeing as kind of the sustainable push in the AEC industry, that is when you're bringing in extra help and not kind of rolling over them and saying that, oh, we'll get to those eventually, or I don't know if those are important or not, to really make sure that if there is more sustainable practices, that they're being denoted and not essentially pushed to later. Yeah, that's right here. Anything else? Cool. Wanted to highlight that recently the EPA and IRA grant awards went out. This was for the reducing embodied greenhouse gas emissions for construction materials and products, and some that are hyper relevant, especially to this group. Build reuse got about $1 million for LCA EPD generation software for reuse goods. They were talking about this, I believe, in their summit a few months ago, something they were going for, but they have been awarded that. Cornell University, who helped present a few months ago as part of Crowd, and their circular construction lab was awarded a couple $1 million to create salvaged EPDs templates and salvage product passports. These would be as you're pulling materials out of a project or hope to reuse these materials, to not only have an EPD that can quantify all of the environmental details of a salvage product, but to also give that a passport to then be able to move through softwares to show that not only this is what the material is, but this is where it is, these are its features, and this is the quantity of it as well. Something that a lot of software tools need to kind of unlock and reduce that risk that a lot of designers see of, I don't know what the material is, really where it is, how much of it is, who is in ownership of it. Cornell's looking to kind of build that template software and passport to then disseminate for use. Rebuilding Exchange, I believe they're out of Chicago, I believe that's correct. Got about $6 million for new stores across the Chicago area, as well as to start a deconstruction training group. Not only that would be based out of Chicago, but would move and be able to essentially train others within the region and beyond. Timber HP out of Maine, I got some funding for EPDs and advancing waste wood fiber products. If you haven't been to Timber HP, it's not that far outside of the Boston area, and they love having tours. I believe when I went a few months ago, it was hosted by CLF Boston. I think it was a really great experience and a really great product using reclaimed wood waste from the timber industry up in Maine. As I was talking to Suzanne about, MIT recently was awarded, I think it was $1.2 million. If you look at this link, you'll be able to see when I send it out. But that was for structural steel reuse. Really, not only is it possible, but getting into the nitty-gritty of when you look to reuse the structural steel, what is being degraded of it? What is the data behind that? And how can we prove, or at least determine, if this structural steel is usable again for engineering calculations? RIT, that's the Rochester Institute of Technology out of Rochester, New York, was awarded a couple $1 million for very similar to Cornell, looking at reclaimed material EPD creation. And now this was much more for kind of finishes and different items like that, but still hyper relevant. And then lastly, of the 26, I believe, awardees, wanted to highlight the University of Texas, who went in with several reuse partners, such as Urban Machine, Doors Unhinged, Andrew Ellsworth out of Pittsburgh, looking for PCRs for recaptured and salvaged materials, and trying to determine can they be used in every kind of circumstance? Are there different requirements that are needed for recapture salvage materials, and being able to define that and get data behind it to determine case studies and disseminate that knowledge. So like I said, when this goes out, by all means, please take a look at it. But it does feel good to finally see the EPA and IRA grants finally going out. For the longest time, it's been some sort of nebulous money of where is this going, who's going to be awarded, but great to see that it's finally being awarded. And then I think this is my second to last slide. I just wanted to highlight some movement on deconstruction. The Mass DEP held, as part of their deconstruction working group last week on July 11th, a webinar on workforce development. Highlighting not only the North Bennett Street School, I know Randy was there talking about Select Demo in Hancock, but also Dave Bennick out of the West Coast, but currently on the East Coast in New York, really talking about what does workforce development look like, and what are the first steps towards actually training a deconstruction workforce and moving that from traditionally demo to more mindful practices, both in a commercial and a residential mindset. And then lastly, wanted to highlight some good things that are going on in New York City. So currently there is a big project in New York City for the new NYC EDC, that's the Economic Development Council. Spark Kips Bay is a 800,000 square foot, I think it's 3 buildings, but essentially what has come out of this is that the NYC EDC has said, we are going to do everything we can to deconstruct this, these 3 buildings. So the pictures you see on the side here are existing conditions of the facilities as they are right now. Like I said, about 800,000 square feet. And I had mentioned Dave Bennick giving a talk at the Mass DEP. He also talked about this project. He's currently in New York City a couple days ago, holding a circular construction roundtable in the city for architects, designers, policymakers, but looking to really train a new workforce. Now, this is from kind of the very much like Boston, a very union heavy New York City, looking to train and essentially retrain a lot of the demo subs that are there, and also develop new reuse markets. As you'll see here, it is NYC's Economic Development Council who wants to take as much as possible of areas like this. And hopefully it's big enough, but you can see that there's regular furnishings, pools, tables. Here's a athletic court with wood, but also all of this tile, and do everything they can to deconstruct as much as possible. So it'll be real exciting to see not only which general contractor wins this bid. I think bids are out now, and hopefully going to be finalized by the end of August, but to see kind of what can be made out of this. Because as Dave had said during the webinar last week, and also in talking to him, a lot of these industries right now don't exist. A lot of these reuse vendors don't exist for what currently is necessary. So what do those not only first steps in training workforce, but also developing an ecosystem to take these materials and hopefully be put back into circulation look like? And I think that's it for me now. Before I get to full open discussion, just wanted to highlight that next week, between the 22nd and 24th, at Northeastern, there is an SCI workshop that is going towards zero carbon. SCI is the Structural Engineering Institute, I believe. So if anyone's interested in that, once this gets sent out, please, I know they're looking for more contractors, more engineers, and anyone on the subcontractor side. But
and
other
more,
than
and more architects too. Yeah.
boom, boom.
Sorry. And I think just a shout out, Kenna, aren't you speaking there? I think you're one of the lineup, I believe. You're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I'll be speaking at 11 o'clock next Tuesday. So come support, because I'm not a structural engineer.
So with that, we didn't have a very long one today. Obviously, it's the summer and there's a gajillion things going on. But if anyone had any topics they wanted to bring up or talk about, if there's any conferences that recently gone to or any education, would love to kind of sit and chat. But other than that, not too much extra.
The Metropolis magazine is hosting a working group. I think it was by invite or something, but so it's like 2 hackathons about circularity in the built environment. So I thought that was exciting. I was curious if anyone else was aware of it or part of it.
Do you know when this is?
I think they've got like 5 different topics, so a bunch of different groups that are probably different dates, but I'm in one right after this call on combating the culture of new. And then they also have ones about partnering with different industries or probably more around like manufacturing and recycling products and materials. And then I imagine at the end they'll publish
Yeah.
whatever
What's
comes
that
out of all the
about again?
hackathons. It's through Metropolis magazine. Circularity hackathons.
What was the date on that?
I think it's assorted dates because they've got different working group topics scheduled, I don't know, throughout the second half of the summer. Trying to see if there's something I can share, like a link or something, but just wanted to share that was something interesting that was happening.
Oh, appreciate that. I'll add it to the notes.
I also just dropped in the chat the recording of our Mass DEP deconstruction work group meeting that Michael was describing just got posted to our website. So I just posted a link to our archive page, which has all of the previous meetings, so you can tune in, take a look at the slide decks if you want. But that most recent meeting is up there, so you can dive in if you're interested in listening to the conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, I've added that to the slide deck when that gets sent out as an open link. It's something I did forget to mention about that deconstruction working group is that this fall we're looking to have a policy charrette. So I can use the word charrette here because it's a little more typically used, but really looking to have a policy meeting and bringing in not only municipalities who are interested in looking at kind of better or more circular policies around construction and demolition, but also practitioners who want to give their opinion on kind of best practices. So Lee, I don't know if that's set date yet, but I believe that's going to be in October.
We don't have a set date yet. We're still, I believe, waiting on finalizing the venue before we send that out, but we will communicate that to anyone who is on our listserv, our contact list. And if you're not, feel free to email Janice or I if you want to get on that.
Just curious, from what municipalities?
I think before, and especially working with the group, we've seen a lot of, at times varied, but I know that like Salem has been very active. Bourne has been another municipality that's talked a lot. Newton has provided a lot of feedback, and then I believe Brookline as well has been on not only the planning team but also pretty actively involved. So I imagine we'll be able to probably get Boston too, as they are a fair leader of this. But I would say a surprising number of municipalities who are really looking to work this into their policy and essentially take another step of, there's the green communities already going on in Massachusetts. What does that kind of next step look like in making sure that policy meets embodied carbon and circularity?
Mm-hmm. And this is set for Michael in October, did you mention?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, while we're still finalizing the date, the October meeting, I think the last time we spoke, we were thinking about having it at the Mass Fisheries and Wildlife in Westboro, I think. Don't quote me on that, but that was what Mike Elliott was looking into kind of securing. So somewhere middle-ish of the state, at least this side of the middle of the state, but having people in person, very much like the reuse workshop, to not only present kind of what they want and have, but also kind of be able to be given in-person resources and make that in-person connection.
I think in September, we are planning a webinar that would be an introduction to what the workshop is, Charette, so that people are prepared and to have some information in hand prior to. But the Fish and Wildlife Fisheries building is too small a venue for the crowd that we're hoping to get. It's only can accommodate 50 people, so we have to look for another place.
Sure. Thank you, Olivia, for sharing that. I think it might be invite specific, but it's good to know. Usually Barbara Bachelum hosts the deconstruction hackathon, but wasn't able to host it this year. So good to see that Metropolis is doing something very similar.
I have another thing. This is just like an idea. So we have a project demoing a lot of concrete slab on grade. There are ideas to saw cut that into manageable slabs and then get them fabricated into stair treads. I don't think we're actually going with this on the project, but as a thought exercise, our team was debating internally, like, that might be a lot of labor, or like, you know, the contractor totally wouldn't go for that. Like, who would fabricate these concrete slabs into treads? Would it be a precast stair manufacturer? Would it be a stone manufacturer? So I'm just curious, with all the different perspectives here in the room, like, how feasible is it? Is it crazy? Is it labor intensive?
It'll definitely be more labor intensive, but I think you could run a cost analysis to obviously if you want to go to precast manufacturer and say, hey, we're going to need these stair treads, they'll give you a pretty solid price and timeline. I'd be curious to, and especially obviously Suzanne, you coming from the structural side of it all, I don't know if there would be too many structural concerns, but I don't know off the top of my head who would refabricate that.
Yeah, I feel like it is challenging. I know we struggle sometimes, just even we had explored reusing some structural steel from the demolition of the building on site, and just because you need to you need to make sure it still has the same structural integrity, and then you have to have it cleaned up and all that stuff, and it kind of died on the vine just from the kind of I don't want to say contractor side, because I know we have contractors in the room. I don't think it was, the GC we were working with was not loving the project. And so as we were trying to see who could be doing it and what that would cost, it was just so many layers to get through that. The concrete, I think, is a little bit more complicated, although I am very intrigued. I did have a project meeting like earlier this year. You know how you're just chatting before the meeting gets starting, and I think it was someone from Haley Aldridge had mentioned on the project they were on I think it was Amherst College. It was out in Amherst. They weren't doing the work, and I don't know who the structural engineer was. I thought it was SGH, but I can't find who it is there. But I think the college was asking, they were demolishing a building and then building a new building on the site, but they were going to be salvaging the foundations and reusing that. So that was the first time I'd heard about concrete. Usually you'll see steel because you can easily just take a, I forget what they call it, like a little, element from it to kind of verify the strength of it. Concrete's a lot more complicated because you have the rebar, and then there's just such a big chemical reaction that's going on there, especially over long periods of time. So I'm curious how they were able to assess the current state of the concrete foundations, and I'm sure they had to augment it and then be able to build up from there. So that's on my wish list is to find out more about that project, if that actually, it was in design, so I don't know if it actually ended up happening, but I think that was a great investigation. Concrete,
Salvaging the foundations in place.
yeah, I think they were leaving it in place and then building, they were strengthening it and then building upon. Again, I heard this hearsay right before a meeting for a completely different project from someone who wasn't actually doing the work, but was on the team, right? So take that with a grain of sand. But I think it is something to consider is, why are foundations are very strong, why are we throwing them away? Can we use them and add to them? In a way like the embodied carbon, competition, the winner of that, like we're reusing the foundations in the existing structure above it, of course, too. But
we've done that a few times because it is often, why take it out and build something again? And our structural engineer just works with the spacing and the capacity that the original foundation was designed for.
yeah, I think though the concern is even if you can find the drawings, the design from like 50 years ago or 100 years ago, whatever, you want to verify, like who knows what the contractors and the subs and all that. And then also just the degradation over time, if there's been anything that happened to that as well too. So I'm new to it. I'm still just trying to find out more information on that as well.
Can a section be taken off? So obviously looking to reuse like if you're trying to look at the whole slab, maybe a tiny section, but especially for the idea of Olivia having of the actual stair treads. I imagine there's going to be a certain amount of cutoff that you're not going to be using, but is representative of the entirety of it. It might be worthwhile to take a little section just to confirm any kind of structural
Yeah, we
questions.
wouldn't even need it as a structural. It would be more like a finish.
Oh,
Yeah.
Like
fine.
you've got a structural steel stair and then you fill the pan with tile or stone or whatever kind of wood treads. And in this case, I thought maybe concrete chunk tread.
So are you trying to just use that as the concrete infill that would be infill on a pan?
Not as an infill, it was just like as if using concrete slab salvaged into floor tile, basically. I mean, it doesn't quite make sense because it's so thick, but
Well,
a stair tread, you might have a 6-inch
Right.
slab and just use it as your walking surface.
Right, well, I think anything's possible. It's up to the saw cut and the right concrete.
Yeah.
Your typical method would just be to chip out the concrete into rubble and
Send it
Well,
out.
dump it.
Seen people use slabs. Danny Costello did I think it was, this is probably about 20 years ago, the Worcester Airport, and took it out in real big slabs and used it and made a partial road out of it. These were real big slabs. You could make treads, I guess, is the short answer. You had the right piece of concrete and just cut it.
Yeah, knowing it's for stair treads, I would say, at least from the contract perspective, that I think if you find who's going to do it, which either you probably find a stonemason or even like a flooring, because they're going to have the ability to cut it. And then if you want to put it down and polish it, you're going to remove those costs for whatever that new tile or tread was going to be and any lead time concerns by keeping it roughly on site. I imagine, depending on what the cost of the labor is, which probably won't be that crazy, you could probably make a good case for it.
We ended up wanting thinner treads and a more like see-through stair, so that went out. But then other ideas, just trying to, what can you do when you're going to demolish so much concrete? And like maybe in gabion site walls. I don't know, I think part of it is like you'll have rebar or mesh in it that doesn't perform as well if you put it outside or that kind of stuff. So
A good question, and something I think to look into. There's several kind of companies looking. We hosted one 2 months ago about wood, and hey, this is the wood waste. What can we do with this? I think with concrete being such a used building material, and such a prolific kind of in buildings that are either coming apart or being demolished, definitely looking into that. And if we could find someone maybe hosting them for one of these committee meetings, I think it's something we should look into. So thank you.
I love that you guys are thinking outside the box on that. It's it's a creative idea. Keep brainstorming. I don't have the answer for you, but
Yeah.
thank you for
Well,
sharing that.
lots of brainstorms. Nothing implemented yet, but
Yeah.
I think we do typically run into like, yeah, that sounds harder to do than it's worth, or like, is that really reasonable? And to the
Well,
point
so
about silos. Yeah.
one thing I found, I just put it in the link. Unfortunately, it's behind a paywall. So I often go to, and I recommend if you're ever interested in anything structural, iStructE is the UK equivalent to SEI, which is who's meeting next week. So it's the UK's Professional Structural Engineering Association, but they have a dedicated staff specifically for sustainability for structural engineers. So they have tons of great resources. Europe's always a little bit ahead of us. So Olivia, to your point, you're like, am I crazy to think this? And yeah, maybe we are here in this corner, but if you can see examples over there, then you're like, oh, I'm just ahead of my time here. So I put in the link and I just did a quick search for this. But I think this was like an example of what you're talking about of just reusing soft cut elements and how do you reuse that on site potentially, I think is what that
Yeah.
article at, and just using real examples, it looks like, of what they're doing in the UK. So they have a lot of good resources on iStructE. And actually, if you go to our SE 2050 website, that has a lot of information. A lot of it points you over to iStructE. So
very cool.
I reinvent the wheel. So I think you're ahead of your time.
Dang.
Something that I did want to bring up, and I forgot about this, is that while this isn't the policy group, in Massachusetts recently, the Mass Senate, I know it's supposed to go to the State House, but the Senate voted, I think 38-2, or I think it's 40 people there, to pass what they're calling the climate omnibus. So there was a lot of different embodied carbon bills kind of floating around that we're kind of waiting for the end of the session. A lot of those have been put together. So I know that this is impacting not only potentially parts of the building code, but I know that when looking at gas in the state, when looking at Department of Utilities and DCAM, electrification, MassDOT, and I think the Board of Building Regulations, all impacted by this new climate omnibus. I'll try to find a link and put it here. If not, I'll look to put it in what's being sent out. But definitely progress. I know that for a while, the policy group was pretty upset that things were coming up and then eventually kind of falling to the wayside. But the climate omnibus is moving forward, at least in Massachusetts. Is that it, Suzanne? Are you that good?
I think the CLF, wasn't that in just an email?
Yeah, I just copied it from
today?
Nicole's email.
Yeah, I was
Great.
trying to pull that up. You were much faster than me.
I was just reading it right before this meeting. So. And so does that have a line? I haven't looked through it. So that still, it sounds like the embodied carbon line item's still in there.
I believe so, from what I have heard.
It looks like there's like 122 items in there, which is crazy.
Omnibuses, they just kind of shove everything together and try to pass it all.
Yeah, it's interesting what got rejected and withdrawn too. Do you know what the timeline is? So if the Senate has passed it, now it's going over.
Or the House, and then once the House passes it, then it goes to Maura Healy's desk.
Nicole's email mentioned that they were expecting some movement from the House soon, but as far as we know, nothing yet. I thought.
But is there still another? I guess I don't know. I don't know my government, so I don't know the steps that has to go through before it's like, okay, this is real. Yeah.
I don't think it's as long as we all dread. I think it's going to be, because they don't go very long into it, right? They're like, when these sessions end, they look to end, and the whole point of making this omnibus was because the door's starting to shut on the legislative session. So I can't prove it right now, but I think this would be in the next few weeks, if not sooner.
Oh, wow.
It
Yeah.
sounded like, yeah, that was the final step
Yes.
in the process.
Nice. So we can definitely do more advocacy. Help push it through.
And to the point earlier about the Mass DEP workshop / charrette, the hope is that not only different municipalities looking to kind of create their own, but with consensus like this on what do municipalities need, what does a building code need to kind of push this forward, to be able to make suggestions on a broader scale to impact kind of like all of Mass's code kind of thing, going forward. So a lot of policy movements in the works currently.
Michael, I just want to give you a shout out. I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but well, I know I mentioned to you that I've been working on with Massport on their sustainability guidelines, but we did include a section sort of on encouraging material reuse, and I linked to your material reuse roadmap as a resource to folks. So and sort of pulled out some of those items, and along with, you know, like encouraging the use of the CARE tool as well. So thank you for that resource, and hopefully it will get some love when we hopefully will publish these sometime in August. So thanks.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, when Laurel and I made it and need to update it whenever life slows down a bit. But glad to see it being used. And whenever you do have that, please let us know. We will love to kind of showcase it.
Absolutely, will do.
We're almost to closing time. Any other comments, questions, clarifications, fun things?
I know that I've met a lot of you on this before, but this is the first official meeting I've joined here, so thanks for letting me just bombard you. Kina David here. I'm the Director of Sustainability for Consigli Construction. And yes, you can catch me next week at the SEI workshop.
Nice to meet you, Kina.
Thanks for showing up, Kina. I think with that, we'll look to close. So wanted to thank everyone for showing up today. This is being recorded, so we'll look to upload and send out the recording as well as the slideshow with all of the links in it. We will be having an August meeting. I believe we will have another presenter from a reuse software tool. Don't quote me. We still are finalizing that. But we're looking forward to seeing everyone again. And please check your emails, because I know the CLF Greater team is looking to have a summer social sometime in August. I do not know if that's been kind of locked down yet, but thinking about sometime around the third week of August for a summer social.
They announced the date. It's the 8th.
I'm so far behind. What am I doing here?
Just need to check
Great.
The email just
Great.
came out today, so don't
What am I
worry,
doing?
Michael.
Okay. 8th.
You were
Boom.
probably busy
You're
prepping for this
prepping, yeah.
meeting. So.
Great. So
yeah,
the 8th.
it's going to be at High Street Place Food Hall.
Oh, lovely. So yeah, so that will be included in the recap email as well. So if you can make it, it's always been a good time for the past years. It's been growing in attendance, and it's nice to meet in person this community. So I would ask, if you can make it, please do. With that, I'll look to close. So thank you, everyone. We'll see you soon, if not at this social at the next meeting. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.